Thank you very much for this possibility to speak here. And I have to say it's been an extremely interesting morning. The discussion has been very rich and I have learned a lot. The Arctic issues are close to my heart for two reasons. I think I can almost claim to be a product of the Arctic. I was born and raised very close to the Arctic Circle. The second reason is that I do think that what happens in the Arctic is absolutely vitally important for the whole world. And when going through quite a lot of material when preparing for this conference, I came across something that my president said in Arkhangelsk in the conference organized in March on the Arctic territory of dialogue. And he said, if we lose the Arctic, we lose the whole globe. So just to reiterate some of the facts, impact of climate change in the Arctic is more than double elsewhere. The resulting changes in the Arctic amplify global impact of climate change. Increasing scope and interest in economic activity in the Arctic means that there's a growing need to ensure that this economic activity happens in a sustainable manner. And finally, the interests of the Arctic peoples have to be safeguarded in these developments. So I think it is absolutely clear that international cooperation is vital because nobody can achieve all these things alone. So that is my first point. Secondly, there are a lot of international fora for cooperation, and that is extremely good. There are bilateral cooperation arrangements for governments, for businesses, for civil societies. There are international organizations, maybe just to mention the International Maritime Organization, WMO, IMO, WMO, and so on and so forth. So this is very good. We need a network of fora for international cooperation. We do believe that the most important international forum for Arctic issues is the Arctic Council. And the Arctic Council, obviously, everybody knows the structure of the Arctic Council, but what makes the Arctic Council really unique are two things, in our opinion. The first is that there is the active involvement of indigenous peoples. And secondly, that the work of the Arctic Council is there's a very deep-rooted connection with the scientific community. And these two things make the Arctic Council unique as a forum for international cooperation in the Arctic. Now, the purpose of the Arctic Council is to increase cooperation, coordination, and interaction. And the focus is very much on three things: protecting environment, promoting sustainable development, and improving the well-being of Arctic residents. And all of these three things are linked together. As I said, the scientific aspect of the work of the Arctic Council is very important because basically most of the reports, the advice and the recommendations given are based on scientific reports. Excuse me. So there are recommendations, there is advice, there is joint scientific research, and then there are the three international agreements that have been negotiated under the auspices of the Arctic Council. All of them are extremely important, the latest one regarding scientific cooperation. What is also important to understand that even if I just emphasize the importance of the Arctic Council, the implementation of the recommendations and advice and the agreements is a national responsibility. So the Arctic Council is not a supranational organization. There are other fora for cooperation, as I mentioned earlier, and I would just like to maybe, because I hope that it will be discussed in the panel, point out on two where Finland has been very active. The other one is Barents Euro-Arctic Cooperation Council, and the other is Northern Dimension, which is a policy jointly together between the EU, Iceland, Norway, and Russia, where very concrete things have been implemented to improve the environment, but also other aspects of, in this case, not necessarily all of it in the Arctic, but close to the Arctic. So my second point was that the Arctic Council is the most consequential international forum for Arctic issues, with its unique characteristics related to the role of indigenous peoples and science. My third observation regards the broader context where we are. It has been mentioned here, I think it was President Crimson who mentioned the Cold War and the fact that this cooperation in the Arctic Council, but all the other cooperation fora as well, couldn't exist if it was not a post-Cold War era. So in a sense, the cooperation in the Arctic is a peace dividend after the Cold War, and that is important. While the reasons for the international tensions that are real, and the reasons are also real, and those tensions cannot be ignored, we are very convinced that it must be possible to continue the cooperation in the Arctic, and that it is in the interest of everybody to continue the cooperation. It is good to note that the international tensions have not affected the work in the Arctic Council, and we certainly hope that that remains so. In this context, it is good to note that military security has been explicitly excluded from the Arctic Council. It is also in this broader context good to note, when we are talking about tensions, that actually in one respect the Arctic could be a region for tensions, but is not, and that is territorial claims, because it was also mentioned here, all the riparian states of the Arctic Sea have agreed to follow the principles of the UN Convention on Law of the Seas when addressing the territorial disputes. So the conclusion here is that while the reasons for the international tensions are real and cannot be ignored, it is totally possible and it is absolutely in the interest of everybody to continue to cooperate fully as far as the Arctic issues are concerned. There's another question related to this broader context. I was talking about security, international tensions. The other obvious one is that as far as climate change is concerned, we cannot save the Arctic without addressing the climate issues globally. And there we obviously come to the issue of the Paris Climate Agreement, which in our opinion, the Finnish opinion, is a vital agreement in order to address the climate change. And obviously we were disappointed the US decided to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, but we are hopeful that the concrete cooperation and the concrete actions to mitigate climate change and to adapt globally can continue. And finally, on the Finnish chairmanship of the Arctic Council, first of all, I want to very, very sincerely thank the US team. US preceded us in the chairmanship and did an excellent job. And we also cooperated very closely when drawing up our own chairmanship plan and also making sure that the continuity is there. So we do believe that the continuity in the work of the Arctic Council is vitally important. And in that sense, we are also looking at the possibility to look at longer-term common objectives and perspectives in the Arctic Council. Let us see how that process could succeed, but continuity is extremely important, and sort of flexible and innovative ways to ensure that continuity would be very important. The Finnish chairmanship got a very good start in Fairbanks. We could agree on a very substantive Fairbanks declaration. There was already the uncertainty about the US attitude towards the Paris Agreement there, but that was not an obstacle as far as agreeing on a substantive declaration was concerned. And that is why I'm also hopeful as far as the future concrete work of the Arctic Council is concerned. I think we can take a pragmatic attitude, and the Fairbanks Declaration is one of the clear indicators that that can be the case. Now, in the work of the Arctic Council, we, Finland as a chair, is of the opinion that the climate change and sustainable development have to be taken into consideration in everything that we do. The inclusive cooperation is extremely important. The role of the indigenous peoples living in the Arctic are of real value and a value in itself. The theme of the Finnish chairmanship program is exploring common solutions to common problems. And with that theme, we want to emphasize the pragmatic problem-solving orientation of our joint work. Problem-solving orientation based on sound scientific analysis and thorough discussions. The work of the Arctic Council will continue in full form. It's very extensive. I have to say that I was totally exhausted after reading the reports because it seems that there's so much going on. I can't keep any track of all the different working groups, expert groups, reports, things like that. All of them extremely important. So proceeding with all of those, but we did identify 4 priority areas where we would like to maybe concentrate some more effort. The first is environmental protection, and there the special emphasis that we would like to put in is biodiversity, safeguarding biodiversity, mitigating and addressing the issue of ocean acidification, and then a huge issue fighting or looking for solutions regarding black carbon and methane. And lastly, the litter that is also threatening the Arctic Ocean. So the first priority is the environmental protection. The second priority is connectivity. And this is basically continuing the work started by the U.S. When establishing the telecommunications working group, but also maybe extending the work of that group to connectivity in broader terms. And here we are very much hoping to cooperate together with the Arctic Economic Council, in other words, the private sector, the businesses. The third priority area is meteorological cooperation, which obviously is extremely important for climate reasons, but also the economic activities and for people living in the Arctic. And here the focus is more looking at the different networks that exist and making sure that they could cooperate more closely together with each other in order to improve on the data coverage and data availability. And there we hope that a closer cooperation with the World Meteorological Organization would be possible, and that is something that we want to promote. The fourth and final area of priority is education. And this is an extremely important area because it's related to how the perspectives of the people living in the Arctic look like, and their opportunities, and also the question of adaptation to the changing environment. There we hope that there will be maybe more collaboration with the University of the Arctic and the teacher training networks, but many other things as well. And maybe two more points. I think somebody mentioned earlier on that we have, or especially our president, Niinistö, has floated this idea that if the circumstances allow, maybe there would be a possibility to organize a summit of the Arctic Council during our chairmanship. It is not an objective in itself. It is if the circumstances allow and if there is enough of agenda for that. But we do feel that this is an area where first of all, the Arctic agenda would benefit from attention from the highest levels, and the good cooperation and the vitally important cooperation that we are doing in the Arctic could actually contribute to the overall international situation. But let's see. Maybe my final observation is that I am also hopeful. I'm quite hopeful about the Arctic Council especially, and the Arctic cooperation in the different international fora. But I also feel that we would need still more a sense of urgency. We cannot solve the Arctic issues only in the Arctic. We need strong international political will, concrete cooperation, concrete and pragmatic solutions, including innovations to address the bigger issue of climate change. And there the urgency is really real. And finally, I would like to thank very much for this opportunity to speak here, and looking forward to learning more also from this next panel and the panels thereafter. And thank you for your attention.